when renowned food critic Marcus Sterling publicly declared that Filipino hospitality was performative nonsense and the culture hopelessly toxic. He expected applause from his sophisticated followers. What happened during his forced visit to the Philippines shocked even him and changed everything he thought he knew about genuine human connection. Sometimes the most hardened hearts can be melted by the simplest acts of kindness, and 1 week can transform a lifetime of prejudice. The gleaming floors of the five-star hotel lobby in Makati reflected the city lights as Marcus Sterling adjusted his expensive watch. At 45, he commanded respect in culinary circles across 3 continents. His restaurant reviews could make or break establishments. His travel articles shaped opinions, and his sharp tongue had earned him both fame and fear. Tonight's dinner at a high-end Manila restaurant would be just another stop on his assignment, proving that Asian hospitality was nothing more than calculated marketing, that beneath the smiles lay the same greed and superficiality he'd found everywhere else. Marcus had built his reputation on cynicism. "Authentic culture is dead," he'd written in his viral blog post that morning. "What you call Filipino hospitality is just another tourist trap, and their family-centered culture breeds nepotism and backward thinking." The comments had exploded with both outrage and agreement, exactly as he'd intended. Mr. Sterling came, a soft voice behind him. He turned to see a young woman in simple business attire, black slacks and a modest white blouse, her hair neatly pulled back. Her name tag read Maria Santos, Cultural Liaison. She was probably early 30s, with calloused hands that suggested she hadn't always worked in hotels, and kind eyes that Marcus immediately distrusted. In his experience, kindness was usually calculated. "Your car is ready for the restaurant," Maria said with a genuine smile that Marcus found suspicious. "Finally," Marcus replied dismissively, barely glancing at her. He'd grown accustomed to being surrounded by admirers, publishers, and fellow critics. Hotel staff were merely part of the service industry backdrop. Maria quietly guided him to the car, ensuring his water bottle was filled and his schedule was clear. She'd worked as a cultural liaison for 2 years, helping foreign journalists understand the Philippines beyond their preconceptions. She'd read Marcus's article that morning and, like many Filipinos, felt hurt by his harsh words, but she'd also sensed something beneath his cynicism. A man who'd forgotten what genuine human connection felt like. Marcus noticed her again as she carefully arranged his materials in the car. Her movements were gentle, purposeful, as if even these small tasks deserved respect and attention. "Careful with that," he said condescendingly as she handled his expensive camera. "It's worth more than most people make in a year here." Maria looked up, her smile never wavering. "Yes, sir. I understand how important your work is." Marcus scoffed, the typical subservient response he expected from service staff. "I'm sure you do." The car pulled away from the hotel, weaving through Manila's busy streets. Marcus gazed out at the chaos: jeepneys, street vendors, the mixture of modern buildings and humble homes. Everything confirmed his preconceptions about developing nations, trying too hard to impress Western visitors. But as Maria sat quietly beside him, neither she nor Marcus could have imagined how the next 7 days would challenge everything he thought he knew about Filipino culture, hospitality, and the true meaning of human decency. Sometimes fate has plans that exceed our most cynical expectations, and tonight it was about to teach a harsh critic a lesson about the very culture he'd dismissed. The restaurant was elegant, as expected. Marcus's performance was flawless. He criticized the fusion cuisine, questioned the authenticity of dishes, and made snide remarks about trying too hard to impress foreigners. The staff remained polite throughout his deliberate rudeness. From her position at a nearby table, Maria watched quietly. She'd seen this before: foreign visitors who came with closed minds, determined to find fault. But something about Marcus's aggressive dismissal felt personal, almost desperate. His review would be scathing, she knew. Another piece that reinforced stereotypes and dismissed the genuine warmth she'd grown up with. "Magnificent performance," whispered the restaurant owner to a companion. "He's certainly living up to his reputation as the critic who finds fault with everything." Marcus finished his meal with theatrical disappointment. The food was actually exceptional, but admitting that would undermine his narrative. As he prepared to leave, already composing his harsh review in his head, Maria approached his table. "Mr. Sterling," she said quietly, "I hope you got what you needed tonight." Something in her tone made him look up. There was no sarcasm, no judgment, just genuine concern for his professional needs. "I got exactly what I expected," Marcus replied coldly. Maria nodded thoughtfully. "Tomorrow, if you're interested, I could show you some places that might give you a different perspective. Not for tourists, just real Filipino life." Marcus laughed dismissively. "I think I've seen enough of your real culture, thank you." "Of course," Maria said, her smile sad but understanding. "But if you change your mind, I'll be at the hotel." As Marcus returned to his luxury suite that night, he couldn't shake the image of Maria's eyes. There had been something there, not the calculated friendliness he'd expected, but something that looked almost like disappointment, not in him personally, but for him. As if she felt sorry that he was missing something important. The next morning brought unexpected chaos. Marcus woke to find his phone buzzing with urgent messages. A typhoon warning had grounded all flights, and worse, a family emergency back in London required his immediate attention. His connecting flight to Singapore, then London, was cancelled indefinitely. How long? He demanded at the hotel front desk. "At least 4 days, sir, possibly a week," the clerk replied apologetically. "The storm system is quite large." Marcus felt his carefully controlled world cracking. He had deadlines, important meetings, a life that didn't allow for weather delays. In third world countries. "Mr. Sterling?" Maria appeared beside him, somehow sensing his distress. "I heard about the flights. I'm so sorry." "This is a disaster," Marcus muttered, more to himself than to her. Maria studied his face, seeing past the anger to the genuine worry beneath. "Is everything all right at home?" Something in her tone, the absence of curiosity, just pure concern, made Marcus answer honestly for the first time in years. "My father," he said quietly. "He's in the hospital. I need to get back to London." "I'm so sorry," Maria said, and Marcus could tell she meant it. "Is there anything I can do to help?" Marcus looked at her skeptically. What could a hotel liaison possibly do about international flights and family crises? "Actually," Maria continued, "my cousin works for the airline. Let me see if there might be any options they're not telling regular passengers about. Sometimes there are medical emergency protocols." Within 2 hours, Maria had not only found Marcus a potential route through Japan, if he could wait 3 days, but had also arranged for him to use the hotel's business center for free international calls to coordinate with his family and publisher. "Why are you helping me?" Marcus asked, genuinely puzzled. "I've been nothing but rude to you, and I wrote terrible things about your country." Maria smiled, but this time Marcus noticed it reached her eyes. "Because you're far from home, and you're worried about someone you love. That's all that matters right now." For the first time in years, Marcus found himself speechless. "Besides," Maria added with a gentle laugh, "maybe being stuck here for a few days will give you a chance to see what you missed yesterday." Despite himself, Marcus was curious. "And what exactly did I miss?" "The real Philippines," Maria said. "Simply, not the version you came looking for, but the one that actually exists." Marcus wanted to refuse, to maintain his professional cynicism. But something about Maria's genuine concern for his family situation had cracked his armor slightly. "I suppose I don't have much choice," he said finally. "There's always a choice," Maria replied. "But I promise you won't regret seeing what I want to show you." The next morning, instead of luxury hotels and tourist restaurants, Maria led Marcus through an ordinary barangay in Quezon City. The streets were narrow, the houses modest, but something felt different from his cynical expectations. "Mrs. Reyes," Maria called out to an elderly woman sweeping her small front yard. "I'd like you to meet Marcus. He's visiting from London." Mrs. Reyes immediately brightened. "I welcome. Have you eaten? Come inside." Before Marcus could protest, he found himself seated at a simple plastic table in Mrs. Reyes's tiny living room, being served rice, adobo, and vegetables he couldn't identify. But that smelled incredible. "I can't possibly," Marcus began, but Mrs. Reyes waved away his protests. "You're far from home," she said in careful English. "Here, your family." Marcus looked around the modest space. Family photos covered every surface, 3 generations smiling back at him. The furniture was old but meticulously cared for. Everything was clean, organized, loved. "Mrs. Reyes works as a seamstress," Maria explained. "She raised 5 children in this house, and now she helps take care of 7 grandchildren. And you just invite strangers in for lunch?" Marcus asked, still bewildered. Mrs. Reyes laughed, a sound like silver bells. "Stranger is just someone you haven't met yet. Maria says you're worried about your father. I know about worried children. Food helps the heart while we wait for good news." The simple meal was delicious, not fancy, not trying to impress anyone. Just good food made with care. But more than that, Marcus found himself relaxing for the first time in months. Mrs. Reyes asked about his work, his travels, his father's condition, with genuine interest and no agenda. "Your father raised a good son," she said after Marcus found himself sharing more than he'd intended. "Look how hard you worked to get back to him. Family is everything." As they prepared to leave, Marcus reached for his wallet. "Please let me." No." Mrs. Reyes looked genuinely offended. "You think I'm a restaurant? You're my guest." Walking back through the neighborhood, Marcus felt confused. "This doesn't make sense," he told Maria. "She doesn't know me. Why would she feed a stranger, refuse payment, spend her afternoon with someone who can do nothing for her?" Maria smiled. "Because that's what you do when someone is hurting, you help. But I'm not hurting, aren't you?" Maria asked gently. "You're thousands of miles from your sick father, trapped by circumstances beyond your control, surrounded by people whose language and culture you don't understand. If that's not hurting, I don't know what is." Marcus realized she was right. For the first time in years, he felt vulnerable, out of control, genuinely afraid. And a woman who had nothing had shared what little she had, asking nothing in return. That afternoon, Maria took him to a local school where she volunteered on weekends. The building was simple, resources limited, but the children's enthusiasm was infectious. When they learned Marcus was from London, they peppered him with questions about Big Ben, the Queen, and whether it really rained every day. "Mr. Marcus." A small girl named Aina asked, "Do you have family in London?" "My father," Marcus replied, finding himself kneeling to her level. "He's sick, so I need to go home to see him." Aina's face grew serious. "We'll pray for your daddy," she announced. "Our teacher says prayers travel very fast, even faster than airplanes." Before Marcus knew it, 12 children had formed a circle around him, holding hands and saying a simple prayer for his father's recovery. Their teacher, a young woman who earned barely enough to survive, had encouraged them to stop their lessons to comfort a foreign stranger. Marcus felt something crack in his chest, the same armor of cynicism and professional distance that had protected him for so long. That evening, over a simple dinner of pancit and lumpia at Maria's family home, Marcus met her parents, her siblings, her nephew and nieces. The house was small, 3 generations sharing limited space, but the warmth was overwhelming. "So you write about food?" Maria's father asked. "That must be wonderful work, helping people discover new places." I suppose, Marcus said, realizing. He hadn't thought about his work that way in years. Lately, it had been more about finding fault than sharing discovery. Maria says you're worried about your father, her mother added. How difficult to be so far away. But you know, parents always feel their children's love, no matter the distance. As the evening continued, Marcus found himself sharing stories about his childhood, his relationship with his father, his journey from idealistic young writer to cynical critic. The family listened without judgment, offered comfort without solutions, simply held space for his worry and fear. You know, Maria's younger brother said, my dream is to visit London someday. Maybe you could show me the good places to eat, the ones tourists don't know about. The innocence of the request, the assumption that Marcus would want to help, that they would meet again, that friendship was possible, touched something deep inside him. When Maria walked him back to his hotel that night, Marcus was quiet. For a long time, I don't understand, he finally said. Your family doesn't know me. I've written terrible things about Filipino culture. I've been rude and dismissive. Why would they welcome me like that? Because you needed welcoming, Maria said simply. And because that's who we are. But my article, words are just words, Maria interrupted gently. People are more complicated than what they write when they're angry or hurt or trying to prove something. Marcus stopped walking. How did you know I was hurt? Maria finished. Because happy people don't work so hard to find fault with everything beautiful they encounter. The next day brought news that Marcus's father was stable and recovering well. The relief was overwhelming, but instead of immediately rebooking his flight, Marcus found himself asking Maria to show him more of the Philippines he'd missed. Visited a rural province where Maria's grandmother lived. The old woman, despite arthritis in her hands, insisted on cooking a feast for Maria's American friend. She told stories of surviving World War II, of rebuilding her community after typhoons, of sending all her children to school despite having nothing. You know what kept us going? She asked Marcus as they sat on her small porch watching the sunset. Each other. When one family had nothing, the neighbors shared. When someone got sick, the whole barangay took care of the children. When there was celebration, everyone celebrated. But wasn't it hard? Marcus asked, living with so little? The old woman laughed. We never thought we had little. We had what mattered. People who cared about us, work to do, dreams for our children. What else do you need? That night, sleeping in the simple guest room of Maria's family home, they had insisted. Despite his protest about the hotel, Marcus lay awake thinking about the past few days. Every assumption he'd made about Filipino culture had been challenged. Not by arguments, but by experience. The hospitality wasn't performative, it was genuine care for human beings far from home. The family-centered culture wasn't nepotism. It was a recognition that we all need support systems to survive life's challenges. The smiles weren't calculated. They were expressions of hope and resilience in the face of genuine hardship. On his final day, Maria took him back to Mrs. Reyes's neighborhood, where he discovered something that shattered his remaining cynicism completely. Mrs. Reyes's grandson had been injured in an accident and needed surgery the family couldn't afford. Without being asked, the entire barangay had organized, some contributing money, others offering services, still others providing meals for the family during the crisis. But why? Marcus asked Maria as they watched neighbors arriving with groceries, offers to babysit other children, and emotional support. What do they get out of it? The knowledge that when their turn comes, and everyone's turn comes eventually, the community will be there for them too. Maria replied, "It's not about getting something back. It's about being the kind of people who don't let others suffer alone." Marcus watched a man who clearly worked construction donating what looked like a day's wages to help pay for surgery for a child he probably barely knew. He watched women organizing meal schedules so the worried parents wouldn't have to think about cooking. He watched teenagers offering to help with homework for the other children, so the adults could focus on the crisis. "This is what you call toxic culture?" Maria asked quietly. Marcus couldn't answer. His throat was too tight, his worldview too completely overturned. That evening, at his farewell dinner with Maria's extended family, Marcus found himself thinking about his own life in London, his expensive apartment that he lived in alone. His professional relationships built on mutual benefit rather than genuine care. His isolation disguised as independence. Mr. Marcus, Anna, the little girl from the school, appeared at his elbow with a hand-drawn card. "For your daddy," to help him feel better. The card showed two stick figures, one labeled Marcus and one labeled Daddy, holding hands under a rainbow. Inside, in careful child's handwriting, "God loves your daddy, and so do we." Marcus felt tears he hadn't allowed himself in years. "Thank you, Anna," he managed. "This is the most beautiful gift anyone has ever given me. Will you come back to visit us?" She asked with the directness of childhood. Marcus looked around the table at the faces that had become dear to him. Maria's parents, who had treated him like a son. Her grandmother, who had shared her stories and wisdom. Her siblings, who had included him in their teasing and laughter. And Maria herself, who had seen past his cynicism to the lonely, hurting person underneath. "Yes," he said, and meant it completely. "I'll come back." 6 months later, Marcus stood in the same barangay where Mrs. Reyes lived, but everything had changed. His article about Filipino hospitality, the real one, titled "What I Learned About Family from Strangers," had gone viral for entirely different reasons. Tonight, he was here not as a critic, but as a friend. Returning with medical supplies donated by his readers for Mrs. Reyes's grandson, and a scholarship fund he'd established for children like Anna. Mrs. Reyes approached, beaming with pride. "Hey Marcus, you came back, and look, you brought friends." Behind him stood a group of fellow journalists and food critics who had been moved by his story and wanted to experience Filipino hospitality for themselves, not to critique it, but to learn from it. "I told you this place was special," Marcus said. His transformation complete. Maria appeared at his side, no longer the patient cultural liaison, but a dear friend whose wisdom had saved him from his own bitterness. "Nervous about showing them around?" she asked with a knowing smile. "Grateful," Marcus corrected. "Grateful that you saw something in me worth saving." The evening meal was simple but abundant, shared among dozens of people who had started as strangers and ended as family. Marcus watched his fellow critics experience the same bewilderment he'd felt, the confusion of being cared for without conditions, of being welcomed without reservations, of being treated as family by people who owed them nothing. As the night continued, Marcus stood to address the gathered crowd, a mix of locals and visitors, family and friends. "6 months ago," he began, "I came here convinced that Filipino hospitality was fake and your culture was broken. I was determined to expose what I thought was a lie." The crowd listened quietly, some remembering his original harsh words. "Instead, you taught me something I'd forgotten, that the most important things in life aren't the ones you can buy or achieve or earn. They're the ones you give away freely: love, care, welcome, hope." He paused, looking around at faces that had changed his life. "You took a stranger who was rude and dismissive, who had written cruel things about your culture, and you treated him like family. Not because he deserved it, but because that's who you are. You taught me that real strength isn't independence, it's interdependence. Real wealth isn't what you have, it's what you share. And real hospitality isn't performance, it's recognition that we're all human beings who sometimes need help, comfort, and connection." The applause was warm, but not the point. Marcus had learned that the real applause came in the form of Anna running up to hug his legs, of Mrs. Reyes insisting he take home leftovers, of Maria's grandmother pressing a small wooden cross into his hand for protection on his journey. Later that night, as Marcus prepared to return to London, he reflected on how completely his life had changed. His writing now focused on connection rather than criticism. His apartment had been transformed from a showcase into a gathering place for friends. His relationship with his father, strengthened by the crisis that had brought him to the Philippines, was closer than it had been in decades. What will you tell people about Filipino culture now? Maria asked as they walked through the hotel lobby where they'd first met. The truth, Marcus replied. That it taught me the difference between being smart and being wise, between being successful and being fulfilled, between being independent and being truly strong. He paused, looking back toward the barangay where his transformation had begun. And that sometimes the most important lessons come from the people we're quickest to dismiss. As his car pulled away, Marcus watched Maria wave goodbye, knowing he would return, not as a critic seeking fault, but as a student of the most important subject he'd ever encountered: how to be truly human. The Philippines had given him something no amount of professional success ever could: a family that chose him, a community that claimed him, and a heart capable of the very hospitality he'd once dismissed as impossible. What did you think of Marcus's incredible transformation? Have you ever had your assumptions completely challenged by experiencing the culture firsthand? Share your stories in the comments below. I love hearing about moments that changed your perspective. If this story of unexpected friendship and cultural discovery moved you, please subscribe and hit that notification bell. There are so many more inspiring stories about the power of genuine human connection waiting to be told. Where are you watching from today? Let me know in the comments, and tell me about a time when strangers treated you like family. And remember, the most beautiful aspects of any culture are often found not in tourist attractions or fancy restaurants, but in the everyday kindness of ordinary people who choose to see strangers as potential family. Until next time, keep your heart open to the unexpected gifts that come from truly seeing each other.